All right, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So welcome to day 2 of our MEL framework workshop. Briefly, just want to go over our plan for today and how it fits in with what we started yesterday. Yesterday, we worked on developing a monitoring universe with all the possible questions that you could ask about related to the elements of your theory of change. Today, now that you've started narrowing those down based on the criteria that we talked about, now we're going to be moving the most important questions into your monitoring plan. And once those elements are there, we'll talk about how you can define success, find the answers to your questions, and figure out the data sources that are going to help you answer those questions. So that is our plan for today. To kick us off, I'd like you to think for just a minute about what a success, a challenge, and an area for potential is that you're currently experiencing related to scaling. So we'd call it a rose, a thorn, and a bud. So a rose is a success that you're currently having, a thorn is a challenge that you're currently having, and a bud is a potential that you're currently having related to scaling, or a potential that you currently see. I'll leave this up for just a second to give you a minute to think. You can just think of one maybe and think of one that you'd like to share for your organization, either a rose, a thorn, or a bud. Does anyone have one they'd like to share with everyone? Oh, perfect in the chat. Craig says new partners that are strong in areas that they're not as strong in is a success that they're, or sorry, a potential area of growth that they're currently seeing. Anyone else like to share one, either in the chat or just you can share out loud?
So I've got a bud, which may turn into a thorn, but there's a new sort of employment model or alternative employment model for some of our facilitators that those job openings sort of will be hopefully opening soon. It does make it more complicated, but it's maybe more applicable to scaling, hopefully more stable than what we're currently using.
It's really exciting. Anyone from CLR or people want to share a rose, a thorn, or a bud that you're currently experiencing?
So
A rose, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Please go ahead, Mayudesh.
Go ahead. No, Ramesh, go ahead.
Yeah, from our side, like so one like the kind of good thing that is happening with us, like with the program we are looking at, we are also like sort of about to expand our program to like another 800 or so schools, like in the name of another, like it's a completely different program, but the interventions would be more or less similar based on our learnings from the innovation we are looking at here right now. So our experience will be used in that program as well to expand it to further into another 800 schools in Madhya Pradesh.
Really exciting.
Yeah, I can share. I think for us, it's government partnership all in all the three places. So, for example, these are some of our champions from the system, from the government, who are like sort of helping us have that success. So that's a success, a strong partnership. But at the same time, some misalignments with the priorities of government and us becomes like a thorn for us. At the same time, having new people and new relationships in new geographies become like birds for us, where we are seeing good momentum. So it works in all three.
Perfect. Very comprehensive answer. Thank you all so much for sharing those. As we're diving into kind of the nitty-gritty, really detailed part of our work today, just wanted to think for a moment about the big picture and some things that maybe you're excited about moving forward. So thank you so much for sharing those. Let me share my screen again. So yesterday we worked in the first 3 tabs of the monitoring workbook. We went over the intro tab, the overarching questions, and the monitoring universe. So today we are moving on to the 4th tab, which is the monitoring plan. And this has a number of different questions or a number of different elements that go along with each of those questions. So from rationale to success criteria, and then on to data sources, indicators, timing and frequency, and then the owner. So getting very detailed about these questions that you've prioritized, how are you going to make sure that you're actually getting those answers? And the reason that we're talking about narrowing it down is because it's never possible to get the answers to all the questions that we might be interested in. So that prioritization part is setting us up to create a feasible monitoring plan today. And again, this is that fourth tab, monitoring plan. So we previously learned about the MEL framework, calling it your project's navigation system. And the monitoring plan is one of the specific tools in the system, and it's how you're operationalizing your MEL framework. So if we're continuing the navigation analogy, this is like the highlighted route that you've selected within your whole system. And to continue that analogy, you're going to take into account things like the distance you need to travel, how long it's going to take you to get there, how you're going to manage road work, traffic jams, and tolls all along the way. The monitoring plan builds on both the theory of change and the monitoring universe. And again, the idea is that it's setting out a clear plan for tracking your project's progress. So as we started yesterday, the first step is prioritizing the questions that are most important to you, either strategically or because you need to report that information to someone. The next step is going to be defining your success criteria. So deciding for you, for your organization, for where you are right now, what might success look like? And then the last part is specifying how you're going to get that information, as well as who is going to collect it. So this is a place for you to align on how you're actually going to integrate this into your workflow and who's going to manage each of those individual elements. This is the overall flow of what we've been working on. We started with the theory of change. You've moved those elements into your MEL framework, starting with the general monitoring universe, and now we're narrowing down to those prioritized questions. These are the steps along the way to developing your monitoring plan. You've already worked on this part, finding the element of the theory of change that you're connecting to. You've also already started drafting these monitoring questions, the ones that are important to you. Defining the purpose. Is it strategic? Is it for accountability? And so now today we are adding on this beginning at step 4. So defining our success criteria and what good would look like for each of those questions. Building on that, we'll talk about indicators for that success criteria. So for each question, exactly how are you going to know that you're successful? The next step will be identifying the data source. How are you going to find the information about that indicator? The next step is looking at the frequency. So how often and when will you need to ask each question? And then the last step will be looking at the owner, who's responsible for answering each question. And these different steps represent the different columns in the monitoring plan template. And like with all of these tools, there are many ways to do it, but we've shared one template that we hope will be helpful for you as you're on this journey. Again, this aligns with the steps that were on the previous slide, where each column is building on the one before it until you get all the way to the end and have finalized your plan. So step one today is going to be going back to this tab 3 that we were working on yesterday, the monitoring universe. And hopefully by the end of the last session, you came to a decision about some questions that you would like to prioritize because they're going to, they're strategic, a reporting requirement, feasible, and or practical. So step one is going to be copying some of this information into the next tab. So this is how that happens. So you have the monitoring questions and purpose here on the left, and you're going to be copying that right here into the monitoring questions and purpose here on the next tab, only for questions that you have decided are a priority for you. So that we're just going to send you into breakout rooms for a few minutes to copy over a few high priority questions. Before we send you into the rooms, does anyone have any questions about this specific process? Yeah, Joanna.
One of the things I found confusing late in last session was that sometimes a lot of the TOC elements led to the same question, or if not the same question, then the same piece of data.
Mm-hmm.
Should we just choose one? I mean, how should we manage the rows? If my question makes sense.
Yeah, and it's a great question. So for now, if you have the same monitoring question twice, you can just copy the question over once. And if you have multiple theory of change elements that were leading to that, you can copy those in, but like within the same row, so that you don't need the monitoring question listed multiple times right now in the monitoring plan tab. Later, we're going to consolidate it further and talk about how you might be able to identify one data source that's going to be able to help you answer multiple monitoring questions. But for now, each monitoring question can have its own row. Okay, perfect. Okay, I think we can go into the rooms now, just for 5 minutes. Perfect. We will move on to the next section then. Go. So now that we have moved over these first 4 columns, we're moving on to the 5th column in the monitoring plan, which is your success criteria. And this is asking what success looks like for you for this element. The reason it's important to define success criteria is so that at the end of your project cycle for each of your questions, you can compare your data that you've actually collected with the success criteria that you had defined ahead of time. There are a few different considerations that go into defining these criteria. You'll want to think about what your intervention aims to achieve and what this might look like in real life in the classroom, for example. You don't need to worry yet about how you're going to capture or measure this yet, but it's just more about what you want to see to know that your program is working as you intended. You'll want to make sure that each question has its own clear success criteria. And you're going to want to make sure that the criteria are specific enough that you'll be able to draw meaningful conclusions at the end of your intervention. And to get at those points, we've got some examples here that are aligned with Dignitas's Lead Now app. So these are the same theory of change elements that we introduced in the last session. And so, for example, the activity was training leaders in 3 foundational learning pedagogical methods. So what they wanted to know was, has the training been successfully administered? So the success criteria that they might look for is all leaders enrolled in the program have completed the training in each of the 3 methods. So some success criteria that would not be as strong might be training sessions held. because this doesn't tell you whether they were well attended, and it doesn't tell you if all three components of the training took place. Another success criteria that would not be as strong is leaders took part in the training. This won't tell you if they showed up on the first day and didn't come back. So the way the success criteria is written here, it's telling you that it's all of them. It's telling you that they completed training in all three methods. Another example for the outputs, one of their outputs was that instructional leaders are enthusiastic about enhancing foundational learning skills. So they asked, to what extent do instructional leaders exhibit positive attitudes? The success criteria they chose was that there's an increase in the proportion of leaders with positive attitudes, with at least 75% of leaders showing mostly positive attitudes at the end of the program. So this is stronger than, for example, leaders show positive attitudes. If you just left it at leaders show positive attitudes, it wouldn't be specific enough for you to draw a conclusion at the end. How many leaders do you expect to shift their attitudes if the program goes well? Another example, one of their outcomes was that teachers will review and use learner data to adjust their teaching processes. So they wanted to know to what extent teachers use the data to adjust their teaching processes. So their success criteria was that following the program, at least 25% of teachers display assessment-informed practices, and this increases over the 6-month period after the program. And again, this is much more specific than something like teachers change their practices, because that doesn't tell you how much impact, doesn't tell you the time period, and it's just not specific enough about the kinds of practices that you would want to see. Does anyone have any questions about these specific examples before we move on?
Yeah, not a question, but just an observation. Like for me, the success criteria looks like a combination of particular indicator plus target for the same component.
Yeah,
Like if we can see 25% teachers, this is the target. Maybe we can say, and the criteria we have said, it's looks like an indicator. So what's
Yeah,
the major difference between these and the respective indicators?
we will,
Would it be helpful? Yeah?
sorry, go ahead.
Would you like me to jump in?
Yeah, go for it.
The difference between indicator and success criteria, as you rightly pointed out, success criteria, that's what we hope to achieve. It is the target. We don't, at this stage, know whether it will be accurate and it's whether we will achieve that, but it's something we would like to strive for. It's effectively our target for our almost KPI, target for KPI, but our indicator will be our KPI or our specific indicator or metric that we can measure and then compare it against the success criteria. So what is the good looks like in our ideal world? In some cases, you already have information about it, so you can have it, those 75, excuse me. Those 75% may come from practice and knowledge established year on year. And you know that 75% is that what the good look like for your intervention. In other cases, you're not quite sure yet, and it's something hypothetical at this stage. And it is the target that you're hoping to achieve. But the indicator will be the way how you measure that. That's your KPI, how you measure that success. Does it make sense?
Yeah, yes, got it. Thank you.
Fantastic. So that's what's the good luck like. That's your target, and then we're going to look after we complete this part. We will look into specific indicators, metrics, as well as data sources. Sorry, sir. Greg, please go ahead.
I think a similar kind of question being, I guess there's a bit of an art and a science to these success criteria, and that the more that they're benchmarked against like established norms or you know, either from your own experience or industry wide or whatever, I guess the more these success criteria means something both for you and outside. Is that correct?
Absolutely, 100%. And you will be more accurate in some because the knowledge may exist. As, for example, for the learning outcomes, we may have a benchmark of what should learning outcomes for foundational literacy and numeracy should look like. Or for the content, we have knowledge from the field, theoretical knowledge, or established pedagogical practices. On the other hand, there may, because of your intervention may be tested in a new context, you may not have information, and it will be very hypothetical. And as you collecting data, you adjust your criteria. Remember, it's the dynamic document. It's not something we set up once. It's something we will want to build on and constantly reiterate and make it a living document. So as you progress and grow, your success criteria will also change. So it will vary indicator by indicator, on indicator basis, whether it's established knowledge or knowledge that's being developed as you progress through your intervention and collect more data. Any other fantastic? Any other questions?
One more kind of observation related to this is that you'll notice that at the activity level, the success criteria is that all teachers are participating. As you're moving to the output level, you're seeing that it's going down to 75% for them. And at the outcome level, you're seeing it's going down to 25%. Not suggesting these numbers are, generalizable to other settings or other points, but in general, as you're moving from activities to outputs to outcomes, you're talking about having a little bit less control over what's happening, and you can see that reflected in these numbers as well. Again, not suggesting that you use these specific numbers, but as kind of a general principle. Yeah, go ahead, Craig.
Sorry, yeah, another one. I'm just aware that like there's a lot of noise in our spreadsheets at the moment, just because we've done there's lots, right? And I think on Wednesday the idea was that we use those 4 different steps to kind of narrow it down to the priorities. So am I right that at this stage we really just want to have identified the few questions rather than the many to go deeper on? Is that am I right? I mean, we need more time to do the work from Wednesday, but eventually we would get there. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, so by the time you're getting into these further steps of success and indicators and everything, you're only needing to do those for those really high priority questions.
So in your monitoring plan, the only questions you will have would be high priority questions. And that's why it's a dynamic document, because if you establish the process that you do it every term or every quarter, you can reflect on the questions that you're currently answering and reflect whether there are any other questions you want to answer from monitoring universe, or remove any questions from your monitoring plan, reducing the amount of noise and allowing you to focus only on what's really mattered for your organization. Ramesh.
Yeah, so my question is around the outcome, especially when you are setting targets like this, right? And if it is a multi-year program, and so is this the way they have set 25% of the teachers, like whatever, like we set a target, a success criteria to our outcomes, and if it is a multi-year program, or in other words, we have short-term, mid-term, and long-term outcomes. And so is the success criteria with respect to the current year we are looking at, or the program, or are we looking at, if it is a 5-year program, are we looking at the full life cycle of the program?
Yeah, so we will have a there's a further column that has to do with the time. So it's kind of up to you what you think is going to be more helpful to have right here, and then you would just want to make sure that what goes in the time column matches with that. So if you wanted to have it be longer term, you could do that and then just reflect that in the time column. And then if you wanted to then create smaller steps along the path, you could set those midterm targets. Ekaterina, is that what you would say as well? Or
You can do both really. You can highlight them in exactly the same order within the outcome space in your monitoring plan. So you can first list your short-term outcomes and then mid-term outcomes, and then include also the timing, how often you collect those. But again, there may be some you want to collect now, or maybe some you're not quite ready to collect. So that's where the prioritization is helpful. And it's helpful to have all of that in your monitoring universe, but maybe only few in your monitoring plan, because maybe in some cases, and I'm not saying that it's specifically related to your intervention, in some cases, especially when you're scaling and going into new contexts, maybe we're not talking about midterm outcomes because it's just not feasible to collect that information just yet, while the short-term outcomes are happening within 6 months to a year. That's something that we can ensure that will be happening, and then we review the monitoring plan again and add additional criteria on the other established interventions, or when you are reflecting on the whole intervention where in the environments where it's currently already existing and existing for some time. Reflecting on the short-term outcomes will be your monitoring process, whereas the long or mid-term outcomes is it something that you do for evaluation purposes, and that's where timing and frequency is really helpful. So you can every so often check that your learners learning what they're supposed to learn, your school leaders are improving their school practices, behavior is changing, and so on and so forth. So you are continuously collecting that data. Is it helpful?
Got it. And suppose like if we want to progressively improve our success criteria, suppose like if it's a multi-year program, year one our success criteria may be little lower, and progressively improve it over the years. So how do we do that in this format?
You establish your success criteria on the basis of what you feel that as I said, it could be hypothetical. However, with outcomes, it's quite interesting what you can do. You can look at the existing knowledge, at the literature, and find similar sort of programs, especially in, for example, you can find some meta-analysis. That's the kind of, I'm sure you all know what meta-analysis is, but it's basically a compilation of different research interventions looking at what's on average certain interventions are, how they're performing, are they successful or not. And then you can see whether they have a small effect, medium effect, or high effect, and find the similar sort of interventions, how they behave and what effect they have. And that may help you to benchmark what would be a reasonable percentage for your intervention to perform. It wouldn't be look like by like, but it give you some sort of indication what should you be expecting. So for example, if we're talking about the EdTech interventions, we can say that the EdTech works better for younger, from meta-analysis, we know that it works better for younger children than for older children. It works better for literacy than for arts. So, and then we can roughly speak how bigger effect we can expect within the certain intervention.
Got it. Yeah. And yeah, so maybe like should we like kind of, if we have suppose like if I have multiple success criteria as well, like so based on my different years of program, like as we move progress from year one to year two, so should we have kind of a is there a facility to define multiple success criteria as well, like based on the year the maturity of the program, or is it like we'll define based on what we have right now, based on suppose we are in year one of our scale up of the program, so we define the success criteria for year one, then next year we kind of come and update the same document, or we have a totally different document.
No, the idea is to set up one document and not to recreate it. And even if you have one, the idea, this exercise focused on your scale intervention that you're scaling. and that's fine. But if you have already thought about some certain indicators, success criteria, it's good to bring it in within the context of that scaling intervention. However, you're not supposed to recreate this document again and again. That can become a foundation, your dashboard. In fact, you can bring the data into this document, and then you can recreate the tab and have the indicators built in. Once you allocate people, we'll talk allocate the responsible people for collecting that data, and you can use it as a foundation of communicating within the team, bring the feedback loops and so on and so forth to improve the solution as well and ensuring that you're on track. So answering the question about how do we update success criteria depends on. Later we'll have a tab which is talking about timing and frequency. So you can update your success criteria based on the findings, how often, it depends on how often you collect that data. And you can always adjust whether, like you would do it, adjust your targets against your KPIs. So when you have your KPIs way too high and targets too low, you clearly something misaligning there. So hence your targets should be substantially higher. Or vice versa, you may have very high targets, but for some reason KPIs are really very low. So what reflections, why is it the case? How can we improve the intervention? And is it the matter of reducing expectations on the success criteria or target, or is it the matter that something going on within the intervention? And do we, excuse me, do we want to bring other questions from monitoring universe to prop it further and identify where's the misaligning happening? So when you're identifying your success criteria, you're using the existing knowledge because you all been running these interventions for a long time and you have some knowledge and data. You're using benchmarks existing in the field against for example, for learning outcomes. And then finally, you use the literature for existing literature for similar interventions to sense check whether you're on the right track with your targets.
Got it, yeah.
Perfect. So we will send you into breakout rooms again for about 15 minutes, just again to get started with this process. Whichever questions you've copied over into your monitoring plan, just work on the success criteria for those. And I've put the slide with the examples in the chat so you can use it as a reference if that's helpful. And we'll pop in to make sure everything's going okay.
Also, it's really good idea. Welcome back. If you are back, can you please indicate that somehow turn your camera on or just do the thumbs up? So I would know that we are all back. Wonderful. Excellent. Fantastic. All right. Then I will share a screen and we will continue without any further ado. Very promising, does it? Sarah, are you happy to share the screen?
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's perfect. Okay, so we had discussed first 5 columns now. You should have in your monitoring plan the foundations of your theory of change, key assumption, monitoring question, why this monitoring question is useful for you, and the success criteria, aka target, in understanding of what does good look like. Now we're going to look at next 4 indicators: data source, timing, and ownership. Next slide. Okay, so when we talk about indicators, that's our metrics, our KPIs, our indicators of success. It doesn't matter whether they're qualitative or quantitative. They are measures of your that allow you to answer your questions. In research language, they can be your variables. So you will list those that are matter to you to answer that question. And next step, once you've identified those indicators, you will start to think about what would be the reasonable way to find where there would be a reasonable way to find those indicators, whether it's through the surveys, whether it's through the interviews, focus groups, observations, or any other assessment. So how do you answer that question? We had the question, now we had the variables or indicators, and then now we have the sources. So what are the methods, what ways we can get the answers to our questions? Then we have frequency, very functional thing. Frequency and timing allows us just to ensure the strategy about collecting the data and how often we need this data, how often we want to collect it, and how often we want to reflect on it. And ideally, we also will have a reflection on, have a point on strategically reflecting on, so what? We have this data, we have the analysis, what are our next steps? And finally, the owner, who is responsible. So whether teachers are responsible to collect some learning data from students, whether your learning teams are responsible to collect some content and test that content with your users, whether it's something to do with your people who implement interventions and work as a program coordinators on the ground and helping to implement, and they actually would be the best to position. You will have different owners for different indicators, for different questions, and as you think about strategy of implementing your MEL framework, you also can think about how to make them not just responsible to collect the data, but also act upon the findings, share the findings with the team, and make it shared knowledge and shared problem and shared solution. So those people, it doesn't need to be only responsibility of a MEL team all of the time. It needs to be responsibility of everyone, and different owners can bring it to the attention to everyone in order to get the best knowledge and get the best learnings out of the data. Next slide, please. Okay, so our data only, our findings, our knowledge only as good as our data. So when we're collecting the data, we really have to think about what kind of data we're gathering, and whether it's qualitative or quantitative doesn't matter. Data needs still to be very strong and robust for us and meaningful to us, so we can gather the best insights, the most meaningful insights. So there are 3 things we want to consider in the context of the data or data sources. Firstly, it needs to measure what you intend to measure. So if we are creating a survey and we want to find out about teachers' experience, then we need to ask questions about teachers' experience from different positions of that experience to probe it from different perspectives. Maybe not too many questions, because teachers are busy people and they get overwhelmed easily with an additional workload, but that source needs to measure what we hope to measure. Then data should be feasible to measure. So asking something that would be very useful to you, but not being able to collect the data or not being able to reach the population or certain sample that you want to know, have more knowledge about, it might be not feasible at this time. Or maybe you want some very extensive data, but just don't have the capacity within the team at this time. And that's also okay. It's worth to bear it in mind rather than get inaccurate or patchy or data with lots of gaps and so on. And then measuring when you're measuring your outcomes, you need to ensure that you have the most trusted sources and you have the very robust strategies behind it. Okay, next slide, please. When we're talking about reflections on data is being measured the way you need to measure it, you want to think about the following. You need to think about how relevant things you're measuring and the sources are to your goals, how specific the tools that you're using allowing you to cover everything you intend to measure, whether it's outcomes, whether outputs, it still really need to have precise information. And sometimes we know that every data collection source has its own limitation. So for example, surveys and self-reported data might be not accurate because people not necessarily want to give you very honest answers. They don't want to upset you, or they may feel like they will get in trouble and so on. So observations and having like additional data source of independent observations will provide you with rich information and allow you triangulation in that way. Validity is really important. Another important point. So you need to make sure that your sources are not only accurate, but also consistently measuring that what they're supposed to measure. And they are context sensitive, that they are able to pick up the change over time, and they are also phrased in a certain way that they allows not only change over time, but also allow the using the appropriate language and speaking appropriate language of your participants. And finally, if you are, excuse me, if you are collecting the data, it's worth ensuring that you have for example, outcome data. It might be worth ensuring that you have a benchmarking of some sort. So reflecting on what's expected within the field, or expecting what's expected within the norms of development, or certain knowledge is helpful to understand against it where your users or learners are. Next slide. In terms of feasibility, we kind of tapped onto the resources that they are already available, so the raising capacity. But also when we think about the feasibility, we also have to reflect on not just the capacity of the team, but also knowledge within the team. And if we require some certain complex analysis, we need to make sure that we have that knowledge within the team. Because if you collect a lot of really good data, then you need to make sure that you would be able to analyze it appropriately, very carefully and accurately, and then act upon it. The tools that you're using need to be very clear, very straightforward. Sarah tapped on a conversation yesterday, how to formulate a question, a monitoring question. Here, very similarly, you may want to think about what kind of questions you're asking, if you're avoiding multiple questions within one question, if the questions are clear and they're not too ambiguous. Is the process of administration of the data collection is very simple, then don't require any specific training or doesn't require any specific software or tool. And if it does, how smoothly would it be administered? As well as I know that you just started that journey, but you also have monitoring frameworks. And you probably have quite a few indicators you want to measure and quite a few questions you want to answer. So how do you find the right balance in between oh, we want to ask X, Y, Z versus we don't want to overburden and saturate participants with too many questions. So can we actually use potentially one survey and ask multiple questions within that survey, combining multiple purposes into one, as opposed to bring 5 different surveys to the, let's say, school leaders or teachers. And also, when we're developing the tools or ensuring that we have the tools in place, it's really important to understand what's purpose this tool serving. So if we have developing the certain interviews, that's okay if they're would be very specific and very precise to the topic of exploration, whatever question you are trying to answer. However, if we are using certain tool for the monitoring, so when we're talking about or even evaluation, and when we're talking about baseline, midline, endline, and those things, then we want to ensure that it's a tool that can be consistently used and used over the long period of time. It's not something that you used once and throw away and start again from the beginning 6 months later. Because first of all, it wouldn't be comparable, and secondly, it might be quite overwhelming for the participants as well. So that's the balance, but ensuring that if that is a long run data that requires for the long run or long term, then it's making sure that it's a robust tool that you can reuse over and over again. Next slide, please. And finally, that data can be, you can trust the data. So we talked about the validity of tools. We now will talk about the reliability as well. So the tool needs consistently measuring over time the same thing. And it needs to have a consistency within the questions it asks within the tool, as well as consistency over time. And ideally, if we're talking about change of behavior, if we're talking about learning outcomes, if we're talking about specific social psychological constructs, then we ideally would use those tools that has been standardized. But I have to caveat here, standardized tool in the global north may be different to what you need in the global south, and ideally we would find a version of that standardized tool that being used regionally or internationally, but at least closer to context where you are, as opposed to in the global north. We know that the 90, don't quote me on that, but I want to say 97% of knowledge in psychology been gathered on the not only global north population, but also on the student population. So everything we know about the world from psychology perspective is very, very skewed to a very particular type of sample and very particular type of people. So similarly to the tools we have, a lot of them been developed in US, and even here in the UK or in Europe, we are using the same tools often enough without standardizing it for the current needs of current context or culture and so on. And that difference become even more important to take into account when we're talking about global south. So if you can, that needs to be standardized, and if you really can, and it would be really good to use something that use those tools that are international, close to your cultural context and norms. We do want different perspectives of different people, and we may want to make sure that we have the variety of voices in taken into the account, not just one stakeholder group. And this kind of triangulation allows us to see the world a little bit broader and wider. And I did talk about the cultural relevance, so I think we're good here. Thank you. Okay, so you can see in this example that Sarah has shared earlier is just being extended further with the data sources, indicators, timings, and owners. So for example, for the activity, the question was, has the training been successfully administered? And data source for that would be the attendance records, and the indicators would be the proportion of leaders who completed the training. and the timing will be at the end of each training component. So we want to look after each cycle, we want to look at the attendance records, and the owner in this case is the training lead. If we look at the outcomes, last row, the question is, to what extent do teachers use learner data to adjust teaching process? How can we gather that insights? We are looking at the data source. That would be one of, you can have multiple data sources, by the way, but in this case, it's classroom observations. And the indicator here for us is the average proportion of teachers who use learner data in order to adjust their practices. And how often do we want to look at it? Or was the frequency at the start of the program, 2-3 months after, and 6 months later after the program is over? So effectively, baseline, headline, and 6 months later. And then who's responsible? MEL person is responsible. In that case, the data lead is responsible. Okay, next slide, please. Ethical consideration. The things we really need to consider when we're collecting all sorts of data from our users, especially children, is what do we do with this data, what we're using it for, and what's the next steps, and who has the access to the data, and how we are using it, and what we're doing with the data once we finish using it later. So it would vary slightly context by context, country by country, with the regulations that are in place or maybe not in place. And it also depends on, I suppose, where the head's office for some organizations are, because if you have head office somewhere in the global north, your regulations to the data collection might be slightly different if you have the head office in the global south, with the taking account to existing GDPRs and all those frameworks. But it's really important to bear in mind that if we are collecting data, and it needs to be clear to the participants from whom we are obtaining this data that why we're doing it. They have to agree to sharing that data with you and have the clarity and understanding that it's something that you will have the ownership of and access to. That we need to allow them some level and promise some level of data privacy. So anonymization, confidentiality, putting all those precautions in place might be beneficial. We, of course, need to understand that we're not collecting more data than we actually need. So we're only collecting what's required. And the purpose of the collection of this data is using for the greater good of improving the program in order to improve the outcomes for our participants, not for the sake of collecting the data. And I know you're not having fun to collect the data for the sake of collecting the data, but I think it's something to bear in mind. And it's very, very, very difficult, but ideally we also, when we collect the data, we have the variety of representatives from different groups or different user groups, and we have the clarity in terms of where the data, who is this data? Do we have equitable representation in our data sample? Because it might be the case that, or it's often the case, that we are collecting the data from people who are willing to share it to where we can get access to, and those areas which are more hard to reach, which don't have the infrastructure in place, and so on and so forth, might be excluded, and they basically the findings you will have will not represent everyone, meaning that it actually might not be the case everywhere on average. It's only for those people who shared that data or you get access to. When you when you conduct a research, and producing general for the purpose of producing generalizable knowledge. That may include some publishing data, so it's important to ensure that you have the consents in place, that you are accurately looking after the data, and the people who have access to the data, it doesn't go past the point of only people who need to have the access to the data. And of course, following the local guidelines and frameworks in place in order to ensure that when you go through the formal review process, then you may need some ethical approvals. If you, from local ethical committees, maybe based at universities and so on, if you are publishing that data. Sarah, do you have anything to add? Hold on, just give me a second. Do you have anything to add in the context of ethics? No?
Don't think so.
Okay, fine. Okay, then we are going into the breakout room for next 10 minutes, and we are continue working on our monitoring report, focusing on indicators, data sources, timing, frequency, and the owners.